Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, and this week joining us from New Oxford in Pennsylvania is Juan Rodriguez. Hey Juan, welcome to the show.
Hi Vasco, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Juan started his career as a drafter. He then transitioned to engineering IT support, eventually landing in a software development role. His first introduction to agile-like practices was in 2014, and it did not go that well. I'm sure we'll be talking about that in a minute. And a few years later, Juan was introduced to Scrum, where he now enjoys being a Scrum Master. So Juan, that was a short intro. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Okay, so I became a Scrum Master unexpectedly. I was approached by my boss and he said, hey, we want to try this new thing called Scrum, and we're not really sure whether it'll work for us or not. So you're going to be on a small team. You're going to be doing a joint venture. You have 3 months. Come back and tell us how it works. And that's how I became a Scrum Master.
So it's kind of drop you and at the deep end, as they say.
Yeah. And so I wasn't given any training. It was a lot of research that I had to do. Most of it was internet research. And that's actually how I found your podcast.
Well, I'm glad you did find the podcast because, of course, for people like you is why we started doing the podcast, right? Because there's a lot of people being introduced to Scrum. Some are at the beginning of their journey, obviously, but many of us are also kind of midway through the journey. And we try to go through all kinds of situations, all kinds of challenges that we face as Scrum Masters. And because today is Monday, Fail Monday here on the podcast, the first question I have for you for this week of questions is if you could share with us a story of a moment that didn't go so well, a moment where you as a Scrum Master, maybe it was the first project or maybe it was later, you were just learning. And of course, you made a mistake and you failed. And we talk about failure not because we want to dwell on it, but rather because we want to take from it lessons that we can then apply in our own work. So Juan, tell us that story and we'll dive into the details later. But for now, walk us through the steps as they happened.
Okay. So what happened with me was my boss went on vacation and we were having a daily stand-up, and 2 of my team members had a conflict, and this was a conflict that had been reoccurring and something that everyone knew about, and this one in this case just escalated beyond what you would normally find in a stand-up or any of the events in Scrum. And I really didn't know what I was doing as to how to address that conflict. So it got out of hand.
So tell us a little bit. So I'm imagining that the team members maybe started saying less nice comments at each other. And what did you do? Like, did you try to step in? Did you try to stop the discussion? What were the immediate actions you took when you saw the conflict escalating?
So first off, I was shocked. So I was like, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do here. So I listened for a couple of minutes and it was getting worse and worse. So what I ultimately ended up doing was calling the stand-up and closing it. But that still didn't stop the argument. It paused it for a brief moment. They left the rooms, but it continued on throughout the day.
So they were kind of, like arguing with each other in the corridors, or like what did you observe?
So it was an open office. So one of them happened to be a QA, the other one happened to be a developer, and it was a lot of finger pointing back and forth. So I emailed my boss and said, hey, this is going on. I'm not sure what to do. I went and I tried to find somebody in upper management to guide me. And basically, at the end of the day, it was, okay, guys, you guys just need to stop and we'll address this later on because we're not getting anywhere with it. So that was extremely stressful for me and everyone on the team. And I really struggled with that one.
And once you now, of course, this is some time ago, and you are now able to look at it with the benefit of hindsight, as they say, is 2020, right? So when you think about that reaction, what do you wish you would have done at that time? Let's start with the first moment of that conflict, which was at the daily stand-up.
So honestly, it started a couple of weeks before, and it was one of those things. Okay, this is just them carrying on. It'll blow over. What I would have done differently is I would have addressed it immediately a couple of weeks before and said, "Hey, we have a problem here. What is it? What is it that is actually bothering you guys? And can we come to a common agreement as to how we will address it and how we'll address each other?" I failed to do that as a Scrum Master. I failed to say, "Hey, let's calm things down. It's no need to get all in a panic and all worked up. It's better if we talk calmly and help each other out."
Yeah, and of course, hopefully, what we want as Scrum Masters is to create a collaborative environment, right? Like the conditions for these conflicting team members to collaborate. And very often, one of the things that comes up in conflict resolution is that people don't feel that they are heard, right? Like people don't, they say what they want to say. Perhaps they say it, with their imperfections. We are all imperfect when it comes to communication, but they don't feel that the other person registers what is being said. Is that something you noticed in this conflict?
Somewhat. Mostly for me, it was a cultural difference. One of the persons involved was from India. The other person was involved from here in Pennsylvania, and there's the age difference. There's like, how do you get someone that is much older than someone that is much younger to meet that medium point? Because we all grew up differently, so we were taught different things for our generation, and we have to come together and work as a team. And so that's where the biggest conflict was. It was the expectation from someone that was older that, hey, you're going to respect me because of my age and the way that my culture is, and the other one saying, hey, I'm new to this, but you're not going to step on me.
So when you think about that difference in age, which, as you pointed out, very likely comes with a very big cultural difference as well, and on top of that, this is different national cultures in that particular pair, right? Like one was older and the other one was younger. One was from India, the other one was from the US. So completely different cultures and completely different expectations, which is an incredibly important point, as expectations drive a lot of our behavior, especially when it comes to conflict. If you were able to go back and try to address these 2 points, right, the difference in culture and the difference in age, what would you have tried if it happened today?
I think I would probably have tried to have someone else in with them as they were working together, a third person that was more neutral. I think that would have probably have leveled the field out a little bit more. Someone has to act as a buffer or sounding board. I think that probably would have worked best. But honestly, this is a question I still struggle with. How would I have done it differently? How could I have helped them? And I haven't quite come to an answer to that one.
So another thing that comes to mind is piggybacking on what you just said. Very often when there's a conflict between 2 parties, there needs to be mediation, right? Because at some point the 2 parties are not ready to listen to each other. And therefore, they need to talk to somebody who's not directly involved in the conflict to be able to express in detail without an emotional attachment what is going on, right? And from what you said, I was just thinking that one of the tools we can use as Scrum Masters is to do the one-on-ones, right? Like have a one-on-one with one of the team members, try to explore what is causing the reaction, right? Like, did you feel hurt? Did you feel ignored? Did you feel insulted? Because that can happen too. Or what were your expectations that were not met? And like having this discussion, we can then start to understand what is the perspective that comes from both of the team members, the different perspectives that comes from both of the team members. And at that point, I would definitely recommend your tip. Like if we don't feel with the difference in expectations from these 2 team members, if we don't feel comfortable helping them to come to an agreement, to come to a middle point, then at that point it really is important to bring in somebody who might already have the experience to do that, like somebody in HR or a more experienced Scrum Master / Agile coach, or of course, at the end of the day, also the manager, as you tried to do as well.
Yes. I think that if you're able to bring someone in outside of the team that could actually be completely neutral, that would be very beneficial. For me at that time, I was the only Scrum Master that I knew of in the company. And it was it was like my first year within being a Scrum Master. So I was learning all kinds of new things and tripping up and doing some things well. So this is one of those things.
And that's important to recognize that depending on the conflict, like being early in your career as a Scrum Master isn't necessarily the problem, because some conflicts do require, expert advice. Like some conflicts are not solvable with the tools that we have as Scrum Masters, right? Some conflicts go far beyond the content and the essence of the work that we do. And if that's the case, then also my advice would be step back and let somebody else take over, because when it gets too far into the emotional side, we shouldn't try to fix something that might actually cause a bigger problem. We should try to come up with the rules for somebody else to be brought in. And that we can do together with the team members that are part of the conflict, right? Like we can raise up the topic like, look, guys, I don't think I can help you solve this conflict, but I would like to bring in a third person, independent, neutral, that has nothing to do with what's going on. Would you be okay with it, right? Like at that point, it might be very useful to introduce a third person that might have a lot more experience, even an outsider, right? Like I'm thinking HR person as kind of the obvious pick, but it could be also somebody whose job is to deal with conflicts, depending on where the conflict has already gone to, right?
I agree wholeheartedly that a neutral party has to be there. Otherwise, you put your views into it, and you could really make it worse than what it really is. So, I would have liked to have had someone else that was practicing Scrum at the time to have actually bounced ideas off of. That would have been very helpful. Maybe have the other Scrum Master come in and say, hey, can you help mediate this? Show me how you do it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And for those of you who haven't yet gotten to the point that Juan just described, it is actually a great idea to find within your network a mentor or a coach that you can talk to when situations like this come up.
Yep. I've since then, and as that in that particular organization, as things grew and there's other Scrum Masters that came on board, it was much easier to bounce ideas with them, because I actually started building a network there. And they would come to me and I would go to them. And whenever we had an idea that said, hey, maybe this might, I would like to try this. What do you think? How have you done this before? It was an awesome thing, because now you had a bunch of ideas on how to do things that may have been difficult.
Absolutely. The power of the network. Thank you for sharing this story with us, Juan.
Oh, I'm glad to.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests helped their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.